Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So this is a part 2 of my Ensete ventricosum Maurelii propagation video. In part 1 I was splitting the plant and inducing it into shooting off lots of new side shoots. In this video I'm going to be separating those side shoots and potting up new plants. So what I've done between the last video update and this one is I had two halves to the original plant. Now I tried to remove the original growing point, but on one of the halves the original growing point managed to come back through. Now, although the original growing point did come through, it was damaged enough that it did encourage lots of side shoots. That's what all these little plants at the side are. They're side shoots that I propagated earlier. I just cut them off from the original mother plant with a sharp knife, keeping a little bit of the original tuber. You can see there's some here as well. Now, because of the size of them, they're really small, it was hard to get off individual plants. So most of them have come out like clusters, like this one here. You can see there's at least 3 in this pot here, so these can be separated again. That's a problem that happens if you separate them too early on. You have to take off some of the original tuber or corm at the base of the plant because they haven't produced their own corm and they haven't produced their own roots yet. So if you're at that stage, you're either best to wait a bit longer, or if you're a bit impatient, you can do it. You just need to cut off some of the original corm when you're cutting it up and make sure it has got some roots attached. But the best thing to do is actually wait a bit longer. What you should do is get the plant which is branching up like this and putting on lots of new young shoots. You want to take off the bottom of the roots so you can sink it deeper in the pot, or just get a large deeper pot, and you want to top up lots of soil and you want to bury all the stems. The reason being, as a banana plant grows, it sends out new roots. Those new roots are higher than the previous roots, so if you bury the stem, it will grow out its own roots on its own root system instead of just using the roots on the original corm of the mother plant. So that's what I've done with this one here, and I'll now take it out and show you how they're looking. I'll see if it's been long enough for them to grow their own root system, and with having their own root system they'll just be like a little bit easier to propagate, and it means that I should be able to pull them out separately instead of having multiple plants in individual pots like I have with the other ones, because as I said before, they had to come out with their own tubers, and a lot of these ones didn't have their own tubers, so they were all stuck together, 3 or 4 growing points on one original section of tuber. So that's why they're growing as multiple plants. But what I can do is I can separate these, and I can then at a later date make them their individual plants. And you can see that on this one here. So that's the original tuber that they were all sharing, or should I say corm, where the roots are coming out from. There's these side shoots now starting to come out as well. Over time they will grow their own roots and I'll be able to separate them. This little one here, for example, you can already see it's already growing a couple of its own roots, so that's something I can do with these. So I'm going to start separating these plants now, and if this has rooted enough and I give it enough time, I should be able to separate them without using a knife, just by gently snapping them off from the original mother tuber. Or the original mother corm might have started to rot off and they'll just be completely loose already. But I will be using a knife as well, just in case some of them aren't at a late enough stage and they're not going to come off easily. So I'm just going to go ahead now and carefully take this out of the pot and see what kind of root system we've got on this. So you can see the roots have come through nicely. I did previously cut this bottom bit off and add some new fresh soil. So what I want to do now is take off some of the top soil that I've added recently and see what the root systems are like, and see if they're starting to grow nicely into the soil or not. Now, ideally, if it hasn't, I would probably wait a bit longer, but we're getting a bit late in the season and I need to have some kind of growing season left to get these up to a decent size before overwintering. So even if they haven't got the full root system yet, I'm still going to be taking them apart and separating them. One way that you can sometimes make this easier is if you rinse this in a bucket of water. You can then get all the soil taken off of the plants. You can see the roots much more clearly, and it just makes it a lot easier to see what you're doing. I'm going to try and do it without that this time, but that's something you can often do to make it a bit easier. So I'm just going to start at the edge here. That's the easiest way to get into the plant, and try and find a shoot. So we've got a nice one here. You can see there. I'm going to try and separate that one. So I'm just going to work in around the roots, rip out some of these ones that are in the way, see if I can find out where it's growing from and what kind of root system it has, and then I can just kind of peel it away. Sometimes if they're too tightly together, you're best actually splitting the whole thing in half. I'll see if at this stage if we're able to separate one individually. So as I say, I'm just going to chip away there, maybe use the back of the knife just to see what we're working with, see if we can get anything. So I've just gently poured it away. As you can see, it has started to grow a tiny bit of its own corm there, and it has got a few roots as well. So this should survive. What I'm going to be doing is planting these all up into individual pots in a rich multi-purpose compost. What I'll also do is I'll take off some of these leaves here, because this has now got a tiny root system. It's got a lot of leaves to support. Taking off these leaves will mean it won't need to worry so much about supporting these leaves and getting enough water to them. So I'll take them off. That will just help it survive the transplant shock a little bit better, and it will grow new leaves. Now this will be very stunted for a while. Although these plants are looking healthy now, these ones that I've repotted before, these really did struggle for about a month until they got the new roots established. And then after a month they started putting on this really nice lush strong growth. So these are doing well now, but these will look quite stunted for a while until they've regrown all their leaves. So you just need to keep this somewhere shaded, somewhere protected, make sure it's well watered, and you need to make sure it's away from the wind or any really strong sunlight, because that will dry it out before its roots can establish. But as you can see on this one here, although I've lost a lot of the roots by cutting them off, there's a good number of them, and there's some new ones starting to shoot out. So this should root just fine, and it should come through with no problem. So I'll just make a start on this now, separate them all and get them all planted up. Now if you're doing it on a warm dry day, make sure you get the roots protected and planted up straight away, because if these dry out in the sun, then the plant will really struggle. So I'm just going to continue now pulling away from the edge, trying to get as much root out as possible and as much of that corm as well. Now these are very well secured together, quite tight, so some of them they might not come out well, and if that's the case I can then use a knife to cut out some of the corm. But as you can see, most of them are coming out quite nicely there. They mostly have their own root system as well, so that's looking really good. You see one there I accidentally snapped. I didn't hold it close enough to the base, I didn't get any roots, so that one I know won't survive, so there's no point keeping that. So sometimes what might happen is it might be easier to take them out in larger clumps first, and then you can just gently tease them apart. Make sure you hold them really close to the base, otherwise you might just snap off the stem. So I'll do it in this one for example. So I'll just take it, grab it from the base and just gently tease them apart, trying to keep as many roots as possible. And from this clump I should be able to get several plants if I just take my time, carefully tease them out. Same with this one here. You can see this one, sometimes you can try and tease them out, but they might not have enough root system. As long as they've got some root system and corm, they should be fine. So I'll just go ahead, keep dividing them, and I'll just get lots and lots of little plants. You can see that one for example, the way it's snapped, this one doesn't have any roots on it, so that won't survive. So fortunately I won't be able to get an extra plant out of that one. But this one here has got its own root system, so that'll be absolutely fine. So it looks like I'm going to have far more than what I actually need. So what I'm going to do is, ones that are where they're really just small and a bit hard to separate, I'm just going to put them in individual pots like this. And once these get a bit bigger, I can then separate them like I did with some of these larger plants. And for the original corm here, there's still lots of new kind of epicormic growth starting to come through, so lots of new shoots. So I'll just put this in a pot. This will probably bud up loads more and we'll get a lot more shoots. And then there's another bit of the corm here as well, which is doing something similar, and it's really dense with lots of small plants. So I'm just going to put these in pots, let them size up a bit more, and if I do need any more plants in the future, I'm just going to separate them at a later date. So that's now all the Ensete Maurelii all potted up and separated. So as I said before, far more than I need. I've also got the other 8 that I had separated originally, and there's also a couple of the larger ones that I've separated. I'll show you some pictures of them now that I've already put up in my planters at the front of the house. So this seems quite easy to separate Ensete ventricosum Maurelii. Hopefully this has been helpful, these 2 videos, for anyone who wants to try the process themselves. It does take quite a while, you do have to be patient. It's probably been 6 months since I first split it, or maybe a bit more like 7 or 8 months. But as you can see from one plant, which wasn't particularly big, this was only a 1-year-old plant. This plant in fact was really small, just about a year ago. So about a year ago and probably 2 or 3 months, the plant that this all came from was about the size that this offcut is now. So it was only about this big, a small baby plant. It grew to the size that you saw in the first video, a reasonable sized Ensete ventricosum Maurelii, but not a huge plant. and from that one plant I could probably get up to 100 plants if I wanted. If it was a much bigger plant, I could probably get closer to 1,000 young plants. So you can rapidly get one plant into hundreds if you wanted to. And although these are quite small now, they're rapidly growing plants. Each one of these should get to about the size of that last plant probably in about a year's time. Because we've only got 2 or 3 months left of the growing season, these won't get quite that big in the rest of the growing season. But if this was done earlier in the year, they could all get to that size with one growing season. So you can see how quickly you can and rapidly you can propagate your Ensete ventricosums. So what I'm going to do now, because the sun's getting quite hot, is I'm going to put these in a shady location, keep them quite humid, keep them well watered, until I start to see some good new strong growth coming on them. What will happen to them is something that's similar to this one. The original leaves that are on them at the moment will be a bit like these ones. They will go a bit brown and crispy, maybe even get eaten by slugs and snails, and they will suffer a bit. They won't grow much, and then they'll start putting out some stronger, healthier new growth. Once that happens, I'll put them in a nice sunny location, and we should get a stocky plant like this with lots of healthy new growth and some beautiful colouring. So that's what I'll do with these now. I don't know if I'm going to sow these in another update. I think that's enough for this video. But what I might do is, if I do a garden tour on my tropical plants, I might just show you how they're doing and how much they've sized up. And I'll probably be trying to overwinter these, and maybe I'll make an Ensete ventricosum Maurelii display next summer, because I've got so many of them now. I might as well find some kind of display to make with them.